Cooking is one of the most accessible and satisfying pastimes that we can do, but there are some aspects that can be intimidating. And I think one of the most intimidating is the massive variety in pots and pans. But in reality, if you understand just 4 key concepts, you will know everything you need to know to pick the right pan for any cooking task. And using the practical knowledge of these 4 concepts, I'm going to show you how to make a few delicious dinners that I have been crushing recently, as well as make the argument that you really only need 3 pans in your kitchen to complete 90% of all kitchen tasks. So let's dive right in. While I was working on this video, I made a flowchart to organize all the types of cookware I know of, but I realized you can take away every single part of it but these 4 concepts and know everything you practically have to cook anything. The first thing to talk about is shape, and there may seem like there are many shapes in pots and pans, but really there are just 2, straight-sided and sloped-sided. Beyond ergonomics, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, the only difference between the 2 is how efficiently moisture is able to leave the pan. No matter how large the pan is, having a straight side or sloped side does exactly the same thing. Slope-sided pans will more efficiently remove moisture from whatever you're cooking, and straight-sided pans will less efficiently remove moisture. So if you're looking to do something that involves high heat, like searing or sauteing, where the main goal is to remove moisture so the temperature can rise enough to start the Maillard reaction or caramelization, the most efficient pans to achieve this are going to have sloped sides. For example, one of my favorite maximum effort style kitchen tasks is toasting garlic. If any of you have played around with this, you will know that it is surprisingly difficult to make it perfect because garlic burns so quickly. By the time garlic looks anything approaching browned, it's gonna taste burnt. But if you cook it much less than that, it's just not gonna sufficiently be dried out to have that chipped-like texture. This is a perfect example of the slope-sided versus straight-sided pan argument because the margin of error is so small. In order to get perfectly toasted garlic, you need the additional moisture evaporation with a sloped-sided pan. And don't get me wrong, these straight-sided pans are still called sauté pans for a reason. You can definitely get many of the benefits of high heat cooking in them. They're just slightly less efficient at browning, but they do allow you to do other things like make sauces or braises, and that versatility is one of the reasons that the daddy version of this pan, the Rondeau, is the workhorse of many a restaurant kitchen. The most obvious application for straight-sided pans is cooking with large amounts of liquids like boiling pasta, which you can absolutely do in any pan you want to do it in, but choosing something like this sauce pot will be the most efficient. Let's take a quick diversion into reactive cookware. These pots and pans are arguably more interesting because they're all suited for very specific tasks, but that also makes them harder to recommend because honestly, when was the last time you needed a copper bowl to make your egg white peaks get stiff just a little bit faster? But there are a few of these materials that are worth knowing about, namely cast iron / black steel and aluminum. While I have seen my share of aluminum stock pots in my restaurant days, I think for us cooking at home, the type of aluminum cookware we're going to actually be dealing with are these standard sheet trays. And these are fantastic for dry cooking, like, for example, this mixture of mushrooms that I tossed with olive oil, salt, and I really want to get a nice golden brown, but keep that nice chew texture that mushrooms can have. A sheet tray in a 450-degree oven is the best way to get that specific result. And if I combine these mushrooms with the cooked spaghetti, the toasted garlic, a giant heap of chopped tarragon and parsley, and some grated pecorino romano cheese, you'll end up with this very fresh and delicious pasta. The main downside of aluminum is the same as black steel and cast iron, which is that it reacts to acidic foods like tomato sauce, citrus juice, vinegar, etc. But aluminum cookware does fine with non-acidic liquids, whereas with the cast iron and black steel pans, because of the way they're seasoned, I would go beyond recommending not putting in acidic liquids and suggest never putting large amounts of liquids at all in them because it will damage the seasoning, which is a topic I'm going to cover in just a minute. As far as cast iron and black steel cookware, these pans are amazing for what they do, and you'll see one of these does make my list when it comes to the 3 pans that I think any home cook actually needs. These are fantastic for high heat cooking, but they do have some limitations. In the pros category, I would include their unparalleled performance at high heat cooking, their relative ease of cleanup, their natural non-stick properties, And there's just something about cooking in this type of pan that, I don't know about you, but I find very satisfying. I would include the seasoning process and that you basically cannot cook any liquids in them as really the main drawbacks. There are a few differences between cast iron and black steel, but the only one I really pay attention to is the fact that cast iron pans are heavier than black steel pans, which means more thermal mass. And a perfect example of this is frying this eggplant, which I sliced, salted, and pressed for about 30 minutes, and then glued with my favorite culinary glue and coated in panko. I can use either this wok or this cast iron skillet to fry these, but because the wok weighs so much less, it's gonna hold less thermal mass. And so when you add the eggplant to this 400-degree peanut oil, it will cool down substantially. Whereas the exact same amount of oil in a cast iron skillet is gonna lose the same amount of energy, but because there's more mass, the temperature will not drop as much, leading to a crispier and more delicious eggplant. And if I layer this fried eggplant with parm, basil, and mozz and slowly simmer it in a straight-sided pan, it will cook up perfectly. This is a great moment to talk about the ergonomics of these different pans because the wok and the skillet are strong examples of different philosophies when it comes to the straight side versus slope side. In this extreme example, you can see how a slope side lets you toss food more easily and also gives you an extra surface area to cook on, but I honestly don't find the difference to be that worth paying attention to unless you're getting into these very specific styles of cooking. The seasoning and maintenance of black steel and cast iron pans is, depending on your perspective, either a Zen-like process of meditation and repetition, or a confusing hassle. I strongly fall into the latter category, minus thankfully the confusion part, and hopefully today I can help remove that confusion for you as well. As far as seasoning a pan goes, just don't worry about it. Use it like you normally would. The oils and fats you cook with will season the pan over time. When it comes to maintaining that beautiful, smooth surface you've developed, there are two schools of thought. The first is the restaurant approach, where these pans are often just scrubbed like any other pan and usually put in the dishwasher and then just oiled afterwards. And while I know some of you watching this might be looking at me differently now, I'm only telling you that to illustrate that you don't have to overthink these types of pans. They won't break, and while you may not be achieving peak performance, even if you completely ignore the very idea of seasoning, you will still be getting most of the benefits this type of cookware offers. The second approach is to basically never clean these pans. You can use a brush or steel, but never with any soap, and you always have to dry the pan with heat afterwards so any of the remaining oils don't run off onto your drying rack. And this was my method for a long time, and it worked great. The only problem is that I found that the bottom of my pans just got gross, totally caked with grease after years of use. So here is my specific maintenance routine for all cast iron or black steel pans. Once it's cooled, I put it in my sink with the bottom up and throw a couple drops of dish soap on top. Then I scrub the bottom with a dish brush thoroughly. Once that's done, I'll rinse the soap off and turn the pan right side up and then use the tiny amount of residual soap to scrub the actual cooking surface. Then I rinse it, pour off the water, and dry the bottom with a dish rag so it doesn't smoke. And then I put it onto a burner for a minute or so, then wipe it dry with a paper towel. This routine is optimal for me. It takes only a minute or so to finish, and it's kept my pans in a place that I'm very happy with. Non-reactive cookware includes stainless steel, enamel or glass, and non-stick. And basically it means you can cook anything in them without worrying about damaging the pan or ruining your food. These are the easiest pots for me to recommend anyone using because you just don't have to worry about them. They're easy to clean, and there's no frameworks or rules that you need to give yourself other than the specific case of non-stick pans, which I personally only have one for an omelet. A great example of this is the tomato sauce that I simmered that eggplant in. My go-to for a fast, delicious tomato sauce is to take a high-quality tomato puree and just cook it down to reduce, ideally in a slope-sided pan, and then season it with salt. I could not do this in any reactive material pot, aluminum, copper, or cast iron. It would damage the sauce and the cookware. So here are my 3 picks. Something around a 4-quart stainless steel saucepan like this one, ideally with a lid, a quarter-sized aluminum sheet tray, and a black steel saute pan. The intersection in these pans of straight side, slope side, reactive, and non-reactive will let you do anything in the kitchen. But anyway, that's all for me on this one. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.